going to begin, like we always do, with a question and answer session with Dr. Menzel, and then we're going to hear about what's happening down at the Capitol in the legislature with respect to with respect to funding for public schools. And our speaker tonight is Alexis Susdorf. After that, we'll end the meeting with executive board updates and then updates from any reps.
Thank you.
Okay, if you have a question for Dr. Menzel and you haven't given me, put it in the basket, please do so. Okay. Is there a process for transferring data or information from one teacher to another when it comes to IEPs and special education when a teacher resigns mid-year? District policy or checklist, who oversees that transition? And then another question, are teachers expected to delete student files when they resign, especially if they haven't been shared with the parents?
So it's a qualified answer. Almost all of our student records are kept on a computer, and so that it would transfer to the new special education teacher. The IEP is recorded that way. There are printed copies that people have, but we have student files and records that we're required to keep. When a teacher resigns, I'm trying to, where's Dr. Benson, do you know how any specific student information gets done? Their email account gets shut down. I don't know that it gets forwarded to the new teacher unless there was something specific. But the actual IEP and the service requirements, that all is available for the next person immediately.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me hop in just for a second too. But a check-in or a checkout process to share information, relevant information that needs to be communicated with the next teacher, with the leader, is part of that process too. So anything that hadn't been communicated yet, we would collect and transfer as is needed to do so.
Okay, so this is actually just a comment. And it's a note of thanks for you and your cabinet for being transparent regarding parent concerns and supporting our programs. Okay. All right, next question is there a plan in place to replace the results-based funding many schools are losing? Or rather, another method of funding positions that were once paid for by RBF?
So when the legislature eliminated RBF, they provided one-time funding to help mitigate the impact, and part of that was an increase in the base funding, but it didn't come close to replacing what we earned in results-based funding. So there's really not a mechanism in the state budget to be able to replace that. The only way that we really do grow revenue is by growing enrollment, and so part of our ongoing focus is how do we increase the number of students who enroll in our district. That brings in more money. With more resources, we can be able to invest in people.
If a student is expelled from the district, are surrounding districts notified of the expulsion? If the student withdraws from the district before the expulsion process is complete, are surrounding districts notified?
So it's not a note. We don't just put like a scarlet letter on someone and say you're expelled and let all the surrounding districts know. But when a student is moving from one district to another, the district typically will ask for their records, including disciplinary history. And if they've been expelled, that information is shared with the district. Then they have a decision to make whether or not they want to accept a student who's been expelled. If they withdraw before they've been expelled, then they weren't expelled, and so that information isn't provided. There still is likely disciplinary history that would be requested by the district and would inform their decisions. And smart districts actually pick up the phone and call.
Okay, this is from a parent/teacher at Mountainside Middle School. And the question is, what are we doing differently since the gun incident for security and discipline? So far, I've seen PBIS and the counting up the UPS tattoos, the UPS tattoos.
I would really need to, for that question, I need to talk to the acting principal, Nick Noonan, and the assistant principal, as well as Josh Friedman. I think one of the things that we've been focused on is how do we ensure that we're continuing to implement the security strategies that we have in place already. And then the other is we've got a survey that's going out to parents very soon, probably tomorrow, with respect to one aspect of what the police department has suggested we consider, which would be clear backpacks. Not everybody likes that idea, but the police department thinks that that's another enhanced way to address the potential of someone bringing a weapon to school. They couldn't hide
Is that
it if it's
district-wide or just at?
well, we're starting with Mountainside Middle School to get a sense of how parents would feel about that. We had other people who asked, well, what about metal detectors? And there are a couple of things about that are relevant. One, the police department doesn't recommend it. They're not foolproof. They take a fair amount of time. They're not cheap, and it's not that it's just the expense that's relevant, but there are many other things that are far more effective from a security standpoint, at least from law enforcement's perspective. We are looking at the evolving technology because there may be a time where the intersection of the cost and the sophistication of the tool. So if you have a wand, for example, the wands that they'll do, that'll catch any metal. So you have a zipper on your pocket, it catches it. So then you have to investigate everything. But the technology is becoming more sophisticated, so it can check and see the outline of a potential weapon. And so it might be able to be more specific. And at some point, there might be a convergence where that works. We're not quite there yet with the technology, but we're continuing to look at that and explore what that might mean.
Okay. Second question, what is the district doing for teachers to help support SEL in the classroom?
Where's Dr. Benson? There is a fair amount of work being done on our multi-tiered systems of support, particularly Tier 2 and Tier 3, but I don't know if you want to speak to the specifics of the work group. So there is a core level of work that we want to be sure that all of our teachers are prepared for, which would be Tier 1. And we know that in order for our students to be successful academically, they need to be supported in the learning environment in terms of their social, emotional health and well-being. So you can't decouple the two. And so providing support for teachers to understand positive behavioral support and to identify when students might need additional support. We don't necessarily have all of the resources for some of the most intensive cases. We try to figure out where those needs might be and how we can move in that direction. But Tier 1 and Tier 2 level support in terms of positive behavior and addressing those challenges for our students is something that we've been working on across all of our campuses. Was it this year or last year where we had a full early district PD day? That was, maybe it was, yeah. Okay, the years are a blur, but.
Also that there may be a curriculum adoption. Also in keeping with the work of our MTSS A and B teams, so the academic side of the house and the behavioral support side of the house, the team that's been working on that, working to identify what it might look like consistently across our district, some choices for Tier 2, so we don't have sites trying to find a resource on their own to support either Tier 2 in the academic side of the pyramid or the behavioral side of the pyramid. So there's been some talk about going out for a RFP or doing some sort of a curriculum adoption to find the best type of curriculum or resource to support kids' social emotional needs too. So that'll be a very transparent process if that's the outcome, but that's been part of that conversation. Not having so many different selections out there, but like getting those that we know are shown to be most effective, both on the academic and the behavioral side of the house.
What should parents do if their child continues to experience anti-Semitic remarks and behaviors at school?
So this is a real concern for me. We know that we had seen, even at the end of last year, a rise in the increase in number of anti-Semitic actions, elementary, middle school, and high school. And so on those campuses where we knew about it, specific efforts were undertaken. We don't always know. And so the first thing is to make sure that the building administrators know. And if you don't feel like that's been responded to in a timely or appropriate manner, let us know at central office, because we have anti-bullying and harassment policies, non-discrimination policies, and a commitment in Scottsdale Unified School District to ensure that we address those incidences immediately and use it as an opportunity to help all of our students understand the seriousness of any anti-Semitic behavior. We also believe that's true for any anti-Muslim behavior, or any anti-Christian behavior, any anti-LGBTQ behavior. We want to create an environment where every person is seen, heard, and valued for who they are. They're respected as individuals when they come into our school, and they're free of that intimidation, harassment, or bullying that could result from any one of their particular identities.
Okay, last question. Are homeschooled students allowed to participate in SUSD sports?
I believe the answer to that question is no, not unless they enroll. But I would have to confirm. Is it? They can? They. Yeah, I would have to confirm that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And by the way, Alexis Sussdorf is a lobbyist for Scottsdale Unified School District, and we didn't choose her just because she's SUSD Orf in her last name, but it didn't hurt.
Do you want me to do the PowerPoint clicking like over there? Okay. Yeah, I know. Oh, perfect. Okay. Awesome. All right. Awesome. Where's the easiest place for everyone? Maybe here so that you can look at my fantastic PowerPoint. Alexis Sussdorf, SUSD, that's why he made that comment. I own my firm, State 48 Public Affairs. I've been doing public policy work at the Capitol for 12 years now. I've really found a niche in the education space. Just sort of my personal background, I do have 2 little kiddos too. We are over in Mesa. My 4-year-old just started preschool, so it goes fast, and I also have a 2-year-old. So on the very early end of the spectrum, but all of this and all the education policy that we're dealing with really resonates with me because I know it's going to be something that I'm dealing with very, very soon in the future as both of my boys embark in Mesa Public School next year for kindergarten, and the other one will be right behind him. So. And then I am also a product of our public school system. I grew up in Tempe and went to through the public school system there. So really education policy in the K-12 public school space is near and dear to my heart, why I got into it, why I started my firm, and why I'm so privileged to be representing Scottsdale Unified at our Capitol. I also work with higher education entities with community colleges and work with a group of 61 school districts called GUPPY-MEC. So just a little bit about me so you know I'm not just making this stuff up. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to try to keep it relevant to you all. I get really weedy because I just absolutely love this world and love this stuff. And feel free to jump in while I'm talking, while I'm after, but try to keep it relevant from the lens of the parents. So our legislative session begins every year the second Monday in January. This year it was January 8th. The legislative session always starts off with the governor delivering their State of the State address on the House floor. Themes in the State of the State address are themes that we see all over the media and social media anyways, so nothing surprising in there. There were specific mentions in there. Dr. Menzel referenced the $300 million. That part of that $300 million one time was as a result of that results-based funding going away. Tricky part is it's one time, so future years it's really something to continue to fight for. Aggregate expenditure limitation hopefully is something that you all are aware of, but it's something that K-12 education is constantly battling. It's a spending cap that K-12 school districts have to adhere to, and it is a formula that is fairly archaic. It was developed in the 80s, so there's just constantly a desire to fix that formula. But as a result of political reasons, the formula fix is really hard to happen. So each year there's just been this kind of 1-year Band-Aid override that we continue to live through, and I live through. But hopefully and eventually there will be a bigger fix to that aggregate expenditure limitation issue. Prop 123, this is also something that's mentioned, and I'll get to it a little bit more in a second. But in 2015, there was an initiative to pull additional funds out of our state land trusts. The state land trust is currently in law pulling at a rate of 2.9% each year out of that state land trust. In 2015, they increased that to 6.9%. And really to focus on additional funding for education. It was a 10-year ballot referral, though, and we are getting up to the expiration of Prop 123 in 2025, so a lot of dialogue about that. I'll get more into it, but it is kind of a looming fiscal cliff that everyone's a little bit nervous about. And then always the theme at the Capitol these days, but the Empowerment Scholarship account that you all may be aware of, it's kind of coined, themed as the voucher program, is also something of mention. The governor's really been pounding the drum on seeking more transparency and accountability over that program. So that was the first day of session. Also kind of a theme of that first week of session, that first Friday, the governor always releases her version of her next fiscal year budget, 2025, which starts July 1 of this year and goes through June 30th of next year. And this is real. This is really an opportunity where she starts the dialogue with the House and Senate to say, here's what I want in a budget, and then we can kind of negotiate to the final product before we get to the start of the fiscal year. So her budget had some pretty fiery pieces in it that got, again, our governor is a Democrat, and we have a Republican majority House and Senate. So if you can imagine the dynamic going on there. So she came out with some provisions that are not generally supported by the Republican majority. She came up with some pretty strong empowerment scholarship reform, and then STO, which is another kind of mechanism for private school voucher. She came up with some repeal and major changes to those programs, which again wasn't well received, but it was her attempt to try to create some cost savings. She did include $4.5 million ongoing for school meals. This is a program that's sunsetting this year to cover the reduced price copay that parents pay. And so there was a goal to continue this program because it's shown a lot of success in student academic outcomes. A kiddo coming to school well-fed has better academic outcomes. While a small number, I think it's something that Dr. Menzel has really been working on for his staff. An actuarial study, one of the biggest challenges that school districts and really a lot live under is the premiums for health insurance, and that's something that I know is a challenge to Scottsdale as well. So they're really trying to study solutions, and this is really something really spearheaded well by Dr. Menzel, but study solutions to those benefits programs, which is really a recruitment and retention issue for our teachers. So that was included in there for just kind of a study to figure out that solution. A substantial amount, but this is the same amount received in last year for school facilities. There's a mechanism that school districts can tap into through the Department of Administration for school facilities, for building renewal, as well as building costs. And then increased DAA and CAA, our district additional assistance, are something that is really important to Scottsdale. And all of our school districts, and CAA stands for Charter Additional Assistance. And both of these line items are really important to continue sort of the daily grind that school districts have to go through to ensure the best outcomes for our students. So the increase in these measures were really, really well received. I just want to really quickly point out to you, the Education Committee members in the House and Senate are the ones that really do a lot of the work on policy that impacts parents, schools, students, et cetera. So these are the education committees in the House. I just want to point out for Scottsdale, Representative Laura Tarek is one of the members on those education committees. So in the realm of Scottsdale, if there's ever a question you have, anything you have, she'd be a really good one to go to and is really receptive for that. So I just want to point that out to you. And then in the Senate, you also have, of the senators serving on that Senate Education Committee, Christine Marsh is another name that serves Scottsdale. And again, somebody who's not only in your district, but is receptive. So 2 people to go to that are at the legislature, have boundaries with Scottsdale Unified School District. Just want to put on your radars. All right, so session activity. I'll just jump in. There are over 1,600 bills introduced and then 130 memorials and resolutions. Just for reference, around 1,600 to 1,800 get introduced each year within the total of these 2 lines, so we are certainly up there for a lot of bills. Key deadlines, just kind of for you all, that really drives the legislative session are listed up there. We just passed a big one where we got kind of past this first hurdle of what bills we know made it through this first committee work. The next hurdle is the committee work in the other chamber, March 22nd. And then April 16th is really the important day that the legislature tries to conclude their work, although historically they have not really stuck to that goal of 100th day. For reference, they went this year until July 31st. So just sort of putting some things on your radar. So I will jump into some bills that are moving through the legislative process or dialoguing that would be probably of interest to you all. House Bill 2147 deals with free speech on campuses, relates to not only K-12 schools, but also higher education institutions, and really trying to honor the sort of school-sponsored supervisor can manage sort of the what's going to be covered, but the students should have free speech within that space. House Bill 2174, there are 2 bills relating to optional stocking and administration of glucagon for those having situations, those students with diabetes having hypoglycemia situations. House Bill 2218, Representative Tarek, your representative, prohibits the allowance of suspensions as a penalty for chronic absenteeism. And before I go to the next slide, I'll just jump in. Again, there's a lot of bills, and there were over 200 education bills that I was originally tracking. So I'm really trying to keep these to the bills that made it through that first hurdle that I mentioned on February 16th, and the bills that are most likely to move through the legislative process and get through the governor. So I want to keep that relevant because there may be some bills that at the end you can ask me, I heard of this bill, but I'm trying to maximize your time and put things in front of you that have a chance for you guys to dialogue on and be aware of. And if it is of interest, reach out to me, Dr. Menzel, or others to get you connected to the right people for those questions. House Bill 2311 allows school districts, this is from an open enrollment policy, to prioritize students of active military or killed in the line of duty for open enrollment purposes. School safety was just talked about. I don't know where I put my note card because I wanted to make some points on school safety to you all. So House Bill 2400, Representative Gress, not on the education committees, but also a Scottsdale representative, he is making some changes to the Department of Education school safety program. Changes that seem to be really, really well received. So certainly hearing from parents and understanding the prioritization of school safety. The original school safety program was coined for school resource officers, so those police officers on campus. This is really trying to expand it to include school safety infrastructure and technology, which we all just talked about with metal detectors. And then I'll also add, just sort of outside of this, there is a process going on through the Department of Administration, who I mentioned manages some of the school facilities work, and they are looking at the minimum adequacy guidelines, which are really the floor that schools have to follow for their school buildings. And actually one of the provisions that they're discussing in that is school safety minimum adequacy guidelines. So it is not only resonating at the legislature, but it's being heard here today and everywhere else that this is a prioritization that needs to be addressed, whether it's through policy or funding channels. House Bill 2437, this also has a mirrored bill in the Senate that's moving, but it is trying to reinstate a graduation requirement for the statewide assessment. This was something in place many, many years back, and they're trying to reinstate that. It would be the State Board of Education that would be developing whatever that threshold would be required for graduation, but there is an inclusion kind of caveat. If they aren't able to pass the statewide assessment, they can also pass a skills assessment test or receive an industry recognized credential. These this one probably has a tricky path forward, but that graduation requirement theme is certainly something been resonating at the Capitol and the Department of Education. 2445, there is some requirements within the younger K-3 reading program, and there are specific reports required from schools. So there is an interest for some of the higher performing schools or schools showing growth to minimize some of the administrative pieces of that. Somewhat of a controversial bill because some people feel really passionate that K-3 reading program is critical, while others think if they're performing, why should we have to do the administrative work associated with it? So just sort of context, not my opinion, just kind of the dialogue. House Bill 2484 would require schools to post the qualification of their school nurses on their website. House Bill 2629 requires schools to provide 45 minutes of instruction in the history of communist regimes. You'll see a theme a little bit. There's a lot of prescriptive requirements around instruction and curriculum, which I don't, generally, I'm not sure anyone would really have qualms with these types of teaching, but prescribing it in state law makes it really challenges from an implementation standpoint. So just the dialogue, again, not my opinion, not Scottsdale's opinion, just giving you the dialogue of some of the folks and some of these curriculum pieces that you'll see, and you'll see several themes in here. 2645 requires school boards to adopt policies regarding partial and full credits for students in foster care, recognizing that's a fairly transient student population, not a population that graduates at high rates, trying to develop some sort of process associated with partial credits. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so the bill requires the State Board of Education would establish some guidelines, and then the school districts would be required to adapt policies. They can look at that guidelines, they don't have to. The bill has specific requirements that those policies have to have, but again, it's local control that school districts can ultimately decide those policies. Yeah. 2675, this has a bunch of different facets that I think would be of interest to parents in the room. Requiring failing schools to notify parents, requiring posting on website associated with their letter grade, enables electronic communication of student report cards. I don't know if that's not allowed now, but just wanted to clarify in law that can be done. Require school districts to post their school report card on their website. I already said that. And then something kind of interesting, but just to put on radars, that some people think something more nefarious is going on. Other people think it's just a clarifying administrative change. But in law, there's reference to letter grades, A, B, C, D. They are, in this bill, removing that A, B, C, D to just reflect performance measures. So a performance measure could still be A, B, C, D, but it also could be 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, or underperforming, overperforming, using words. So it's interesting that they're doing that, but just something that people are keeping an eye on, because it could potentially mean somebody has interest in a bigger accountability system change. House Bill 2699 requires internet safety instruction for students in grades 5 through 12. Again, another kind of theme that you'll continue to see of really prescriptive requirements on what school districts have to teach, which some folks don't always like. They like to honor the local control aspects. Let's see, I talked about aggregate expenditure limitation. I just point out one bill, Representative Gress, again, is yours here in Scottsdale, but there are a tremendous amount of AEL bills I won't even get into, but everyone acknowledges something needs to happen and there's a problem. It's just what that solution is. There's a lot of different cooks in that kitchen. There's short-term solutions, there's some midterm solutions, and then there's interest to longer-term solutions, and then there's interest to fully repeal. So good to know everyone's got ideas, but hopefully we get an idea across the finish line that works for everyone. So I mentioned Prop 123, and I put this on your radars because it could be on your ballot maybe at some point, because there are several referrals right now from the legislature with different concepts around Prop 123. Again, just kind of going back, this is the request for additional funds out of the state land trust than what's constitutionally allowed right now. It's just an extension of that, which is sunsetting in 2025. So the iteration is it was originally at 6.9. There is a new amendment dropping that percentage down to 5.5%. So the percentage is still on the table. There is a different version floating around with 8.9%. So they're still finessing what percent they feel comfortable with to protect the corpus. But then there is a policy aspect of that. So with this continuation of whatever percentage they determine, they really want to earmark it for teacher salaries. And there is not only the earmark for teacher salaries, but there's a lot of policy provisions in there. Without getting in too much detail, I think there are There's a lot of work that needs to be done, not only in the percentage piece, but also the policy associated with these teacher salaries. There is also an interest to expand this beyond teacher salaries, knowing that a lot of our paraprofessionals are equally important to showing a student's academic outcome. So there's just a lot cooking here, but you may see this something on your ballot. We will see what that is, what the result is, but there is a lot of dialogue here. Good news is there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of interest, because at the end of the day, I'll get to it at the end, but our financial revenue for our state is looking really, really gloomy. COVID dollars are going down. There's a new concept of flat tax. All of these are cooking up a storm of the state going into some pretty negative financial situations. So looking at some of these entities like the State Land Trust are really some would believe important to ensure adequate education funding continues. Okay, on the other side, in the Senate chamber, there is Senate Bill 1058. Got a lot of pieces of it, but requiring personal finance course for graduation. Again, kind of another curriculum mandate. This one's extra unique because it's required for a semester of personal finance would be required for graduation. Again, I don't think anyone's denying that personal finance is important. I honestly think personal finance is probably in a lot of the curriculum already, but a requirement for graduation is where it becomes problematic. 1097, just one on your radars. I don't know how much farther it will get, but it did get through that first hurdle I talked about. But trying to create partisan school board elections. Right now they're not partisan, so it's really trying to create partisan school board elections. Yeah, I don't know if the process is like that clear. It would essentially be Republicans and Democrats identifying themselves. I know there was a lot of debate in committee on like what would this look like in a primary space. Again, I don't think it's going to go very far. This isn't the first year of this concept. It's came a couple years now, but I'm not sure it's been like fully baked on like how this would look in implementation. But again, there's a theme and interest, because at the end of the day, you know, some of this is there's some partisan folks that serve on our governing boards. So there's a belief that they should be able to identify their political party. Senate Bill 1166 requires a school to notify a parent within 5 days if a different biological pronoun is used by the student. There's a couple of these themes. Senate Bill 1182 requires a school to provide reasonable accommodations for showers and enables a private cause of action suit if they feel like their student was in a situation with the opposite sex and shouldn't have been. Let's see. Senate Bill 1187. This one's relating to polling places. So when a school district has a bond or override on their ballot, trying to create a different neutral place for those to commence, although the school district can be used if that's the only place. We know in some of these rural communities there's not a tremendous amount, but trying to, in situations where they do, kind of like an election integrity concept that is moving through. Let's see, Senate Bill 1283 requires a bond or override statement on the ballot to reflect the property tax reductions if not continued. Not sure how much farther that one will go. I do think it is moving or did move out of the Senate today, but it does have some challenges when it gets to the governor's office, but wanted to put it on your radars. Let's see, Senate Bill 1369 requires AD to submit a school safety report through surveying schools. You guys mentioned school safety. This is somewhat already done, so I think just sort of the background of this is there's some people that think it's a bit duplicative that what exists now, but just school safety being a theme, I want to make sure I have that on your radars. Let's see, 1404 requires convicted sex offenders with legal custody of the child to notify their child's schools. I know in Scottsdale's reference, I talked to Dr. Menzel about that. There is technology now utilized for that, but this is maybe for some of our smaller rural school districts, this could be something helpful to them. Let's see, continues the Senate Bill 1455. This one's important, especially for Scottsdale. Let me put this on your radars. It continues the ability to use the school tax credit for capital, school meals, healthcare supplies, playground equipment. I know an example of a tennis shade was just shared with me. I know I was over at, was it Arcadia with the robotics lab? But the ability to use this for capital is sunsetting this year. And so, and someone like Scottsdale really maximize these dollars for student activities, student outcomes. So this one, definitely it's important. Is moving out of the Senate. It's had a pretty well received, but if this is of interest to you all and knowing your interest within the budget space, I just want to put this on your radar because this is something, while many schools utilize those public school tax credits, this one is really beneficial and valuable and used by all of your schools here in this district. So put that on your radar. If you ever run into your legislator or are feeling like reaching out to them, this would be a good one to reach out to and say support that.
So can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
If it's on our radar and we want to do something about it, what can we do?
Yeah. If you guys know who your legislators are, and at the end of this, my email would be there. If you know who your legislators are, you can send them an email saying who you are from their district and you support this, support Senate Bill 1455 to continue public school tax credits. I think an email to them is going to be the most powerful. You know who your legislators are. If you don't, no problem. At the end of this, jot down my email and I'll get you connected with those emails. Also phone calls to their offices. So those types of activities are really well received.
What about RTS?
Yeah, the request to speak system, it is, you have to have an account activated. Again, if you activate your account, you have to physically go to the Capitol to activate it. You at the Capitol, and then you can go in the system, it's called request to speak, and you can sign in on any bill you want anytime, including this one, to take your position. And then if it's in committee, you're able to add a 250 word or less note on how you feel about the bill. So yeah, I encourage you to take advantage of that. And something I know that the legislators really value is when you write in the note, hi, I'm blah, blah, blah from LD, whatever. So they know that they're your constituent or you're their constituent. So yeah, if you have interest in the request to speak system, if you have interest in emails, jot down my contact and I can get you all connected with the right people. All right, let's see, 1459. This one probably going to get changed a little bit through the process, but it requires the Department of Education to reduce by 2 letter grades for not fulfilling prescribed disciplinary actions recommended by teachers. There is a belief that some of the disciplinary actions that teachers are bringing forward are not being listened to by leadership. So they are trying to add a discipline. If they don't honor it by a certain threshold and percentage, it would be 2 letter grades. I think the 2 letter grades is received as a very punitive, right? If you go from a B to a D, that is incredibly impactful. It impacts the housing community, that impacts everyone. So, so I think there's an interest to finagle with this letter grade concept, but in general, they want to have some sort of teeth to when the teachers make these disciplinary actions that they're taken seriously. Let's see, special education was brought up today, so this one of interest to whoever that is. 1463 has a bunch of different pieces in it, but it comes from a really great person, great place, and it's establishing an IEP advisory council and also trying to develop a statewide IEP planning form. There are some other provisions of the bill empowering parents that is being worked out, but definitely something of interest to some folks in the room that ask questions on that. 1465 relates to there are requirements for teachers that serve students in reading capacity, students to read in K through 5 have to have a specific literacy endorsement. That was put on and was required to be obtained by teachers by 2028, but there were some opt-out pieces of it. But there are some interest to now remove that endorsement requirement because there's belief that it's somewhat administratively challenging to obtain. So we'll see where that one goes. Certainly been a hot topic because there's folks that are really passionate that this literacy endorsement is really important for our teachers. And then there's the we're having a teacher shortage crisis. So if this is another hurdle, we may have a hard time getting these teachers. So just sort of 2 sides of the argument to bring to you all. Let's see, 1555 prohibits a school from disallowing a teacher to bring and breastfeed an infant at school and requires the school to provide reasonable accommodations. Another one that is continuing dialogue. There's a lot of these concepts of infant at work program. I actually had the blessing to have it for both of my boys, but trying to understand how that would work with a teacher who's got a class full of kiddos all day. So something. No, there's no specifics on the bill. The bill is incredibly simple and doesn't have a tremendous amount of detail. But those are questions that people are asking as well, for sure. Yeah, what does that mean? What does that look like? Go ahead. Yeah, the question was, does it come in and then they leave? It's not clear, but I think the concern is the latter could happen. And again, I've had an infant at work program. I've made it work, but for a class full of, I don't know, teacher class sizes now are fairly substantial. It's not always practical to think that they can have their infant all day with 30 middle schoolers as well. So we'll see, but it is moving. So if this is something of interest, I would say reaching out to your legislator or Senator Bennett, who's the education chair, just to provide your perspective from a parent's lens might be helpful, because it's just one of those topics. Like, it's breastfeeding your child is a blessing and an honor and something that, you know, people want and like to do, but having that infant at school all day could hinder some things. Go ahead. So yeah, the question was a federal requirement. So this was part of the dialogue as well, and actually Senator Marsh made this comment of maybe having some provision in there associated with that. I'm not familiar with the federal laws, but this was dialogue in committee of, like, could that be a solution to this, to have like a space to pump? Like, would that be maybe a good middle ground? So yeah, interesting concept. Let's see, 1560, there are, non-certified employees, so trying to develop a requirement that a person who has disciplinary actions in another state for non-certified employees to have to complete or fulfill those before they come and work in Arizona. Senate Bill 1576, again, more of those kind of curriculum requirements. Senator Kavanaugh is actually more of the northern part of Scottsdale, but he's also a representative. But instruction in Asian American, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander history. Another school safety bill, 1600, requires school districts to train employed school police officers to be trained in interactions with students with disabilities. Senate Bill 1654, I call this the title reform bill because Title 15 is the education statute, and it has just become such a bear. It's so big and so many pieces and so prescriptive, because over time we run bills like this that get through the process, and then Title 15 that's that big is now this big. And these are all the things that schools have to do and adhere to. And so there's an interest to sort of work towards a Title 15 reset. That is what this bill is doing. It's an 89-page bill, so I won't get into the pieces of it, but it's got really a lot of administrative pieces of it that's trying to condense some of the extensive reporting requirements and duplicative reporting requirements that school districts do. It's also got our public school tax credit stuff that I talked about earlier. Well, I take ownership, but the one that is of interest to you, they also worked that into this bill. So it's just got a lot of different provisions. It's kind of what we call an omnibus. It's got a lot of different stuff, but generally supported by the K-12, both district and charter community, because Title 15, the education statutes, have gotten pretty extensive and detailed and prescriptive, and it's really hard as a result to just be a teacher and be in the classroom as a result. I'm not an expert, Dr. Menzel, and the specific curriculum is, do you guys cover communist regimes? And then to go further, it gives you like the 6 or 7 communist regimes that you're able to talk about. The bill does. So it's not even just communist regimes. It gives you the 6 ones you're able to cover.
We do, and they'll be covered in a number of parts of the curriculum. So I'm not sure how this would add to that. I wondered if it was 45 minutes a day, or what the specific amount of time was. So yes, we teach about communist regimes, and again, I think the earlier point that was made, that when you legislate specific curricular aspects, it makes it really difficult for us to do the job of providing a comprehensive curricular suite of courses for our students. You could simply say that it must be included in your history curriculum scope and sequence and figure out where it's appropriate. But to call it out as a single topic is kind of challenging, because then we have to be able to record where are the 45 minutes that you taught it, and is it taught to each kid every year, or is it once in your high school experience? Or
Well, because auditing, I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, all of this is auditable. So it while it sounds like it's already kind of built in, potentially there has to be some sort of paper trail at that point to ensure the students got that from an auditing perspective. So yeah, again, I don't know if anyone's denying that personal finance, that Asian, Pacific, and Hawaiian. Like I've never heard anyone say like no way to these, but it's just in general, how far do we go, right? Like how many more prescriptive bills could we run that do that type of stuff? It gets really out of control really quickly. So let's see. SCR 1013, I mentioned a couple of bills, and I put this one especially on your radar because it's a resolution. It means that it goes from the legislature to the ballot. It skips the governor. So the governor, who has historically been pretty heavy-handed in her vetoes, this would not be something that she's able to veto. But it would bring to the ballot. I mentioned that shower bill previously with the have to make reasonable accommodations for showers combined with the private cause of action. And then there's the other bill with the parent permission to call a different pronoun or name. And then there's an employee allowance to call the biological pronoun, so an employee could decide how they want to call a student. So it just kind of putting on your radars, it would be something on the ballot. So if it passed, it would be something you all saw on your ballot. So that's why I want to make that point. The resolutions don't go through the legislative process up to the governor. They go from the House to from the Senate to the House into the situation to the ballot.
How long is that process, like going from the House to the ballot? Would it be on the November ballot?
November ballot. Yep. And then I just put this third, again, the 8.9% increase, another one of those Prop 123. The percentages are all kind of different, and the provisions around where those dollars go, there's just a lot of thoughts. But I will add, so I keep talking about this aggregate expenditure limitation concept. Another concept that you could probably start to hear about more as well is this concept of what's called a trigger. When Prop 123 was passed in 2015, there was a requirement that if the total state budget got to 50%, the legislature or the state budget would then be required to be cut by a certain percentage. Is it 2 or 4%? I'm sorry, it's been a long day. So these triggers would essentially require the state budget to be reduced in the education space for K-12, which is really problematic. And so these triggers are like the new AE, aggregate expenditure limitation, coming up. So if you are in the media and you see a lot of like spending cap debacle at the Capitol, I anticipate the triggers could be the next AEL, because they're problematic, because we are getting close to those triggers over the next few years if they're not addressed. If someone doesn't revise those triggers, we could get to them and education funding could get cut. So just put that on your radars as something you could start to see or may see in the next couple of years, and you'll say, oh yeah, she told me about those triggers. So just next couple weeks, just continue that committee work that I talked about. So if any of these bills that I talked about are of interest to you, now is the time, because they are really debating these in committee and they love to hear from their constituents. I mentioned at the beginning, and I'll just continue, we've got a really, really poor budget outlook. We're looking at having to cut the existing budget by nearly $400 million, and then looking at a substantial budget deficit for next year. Again, the result of that is a compilation of things, a compilation of maybe a little bit overspending. Last year, there was the new flat tax, which is resulting in less income tax coming to the state, combined with less COVID dollars out there anymore. So all of those are creating a little bit of an economic squeeze. And what that means is we're going to look at budget cuts, hopefully no budget cuts in education, but that's where you all can come in from an advocacy standpoint, just to convey that if you feel strongly that education needs to continue to be funded or have additional funding, there's avenues for you to do that. But it's going to be a dogfight over the next couple months, because they're going to try to figure out what to do with this budget situation. And it's going to certainly result in some budget cuts somewhere, hopefully not to education. The governor did say in her State of the State that she did not want that, but it's looking really, really grim. So we'll just have to be diligent in ensuring that education funding is not on the table when these budget cuts are discussed. There's also this rainy day fund concept, but there's no interest at this point that I've heard to tap into it. They have a rainy day fund, like a savings account, but some don't think it's raining yet. So, and then lastly, the 2024 campaign squeeze, I just put that on you because there is a little bit more interest to get through the legislative session sooner than they did last year on July 31st, because remember, they're all up for re-election. Them being at the legislature are all up for re-election this year. So my optimism that we'll get done well before July is there. And then they will be out there and sending you guys all kinds of mailers and knocking on your doors. So easy ways to get involved, just to kind of cover, take a position in the request to speak system again at the end. Take my contact. I can talk you through how to get set up, and you can go crazy on any bills you want to take a position on. Email your legislators your thoughts on this legislation or anything else you hear. You can always request a meeting with your legislator. Truly, I think they are all lovely in their own ways, so they would really enjoy hearing from you, and do take those types of meetings if it is of interest. And then I promised you, my cell phone number, my email, seriously, anytime, please feel free to reach out. That's it. Questions? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was
There was like a dead
maybe I just need to get closer, I guess. Kind of in bringing up like the governor and the STO, and has there ever been any talk in just allowing the public school tax credit to be increased to match that of private schools, since it's so much less right now?
Yeah, because there's there's a lot of tax credits, right? Yeah, I know when this public school tax credit has been going through the process, that came up. That is there a way that we could match that to private schools? I don't see politically it happening at this point in time, just given we run into a hairy situation on public school tax credits on both sides of the aisles. There are Democrats that believe it's an inequitable system, and then there's Republicans that don't generally support traditional public education as much as they should. So it's one of those things that you just, and Dr. Menzel and others I've talked to, it's like we just got to get the date stricken out to get these important line items continued first. And then some of these other topics of increasing it or having new line items. I know there's been interest in line items for full day kindergarten. So having some of these continued conversations need to happen after we get through this initial sunset that's coming. Right now, the bill is merely just trying to extend the use of these funds in perpetuity beyond the sunset date of June 30th of this year. So yes, it is certainly a dialogue on the table. Happening this year, no, but something that you or others could continue to beat the drum on, because I certainly don't think we would get in the way. It's got problems on both sides of the aisle for different reasons.
Do you think it's more likely to get that increased over getting the private school one repealed or decreased?
Yeah, so I think you're confusing. So there's the STO, Student Tuition Organizations. Yeah, so that's like, yeah, essentially a voucher. The private school tax credits are where you all can, as an individual at 400 or a couple at 800, give to the school for certain categories. Correct. Yeah. So, yeah. I can tell you, I don't think it would happen in my lifetime that it would get as high as STOs, but I know that there is interest. There is a public or private school tax credit that I think is higher, like double that. Don't quote me. That I think could get there over time, like creating more equity across some of these sort of tax credit mechanisms, if that's helpful.
Well, I kind of had the same question about, you mentioned in the State of the State that the governor was interested in voucher reform. We also have a House and a Senate that are both Republican controlled. So is there, I mean, she wants voucher reform. Do you see anything like that coming through at all, like getting through the House and the Senate at all? In your professional, just your professional opinion?
No.
No.
Easy answer. There are a couple, I didn't put them in front of you today, but there are a couple concepts out there, but they are super surface level concepts that aren't gonna really make or break. You know, the ESA program is also run out of the Department of Education, who's also a Republican. So that also makes, sometimes you can do things outside of the legislative space from an administrative lens. And so that also is a different dynamic. But ultimately, to summarize, I don't see it happening. But, you know, I hate to be, the bearer of bad news. But it's just not, it's not in my crystal ball. But not to say people aren't going to, like, stop trying. They have so many bills out there. They've tried. It's just, there's just no movement. And there was an interim committee. So last fall, they had a committee meet a couple times to develop and discuss accountability, but none of that really went anywhere either.
What's the timeline for the budget? When are they going to start hammering it out, and when do they vote?
So the state budget. So again, she released her budget on January 12th. The dialogue is happening probably after they conclude committee work is when we'll really start to see it heating up. So end of March, beginning of April. Last year they passed the budget May 10th, I think. But that was surprising. Everyone thought it was going to be passed much later than May 10th. But they do risk a government freeze, which we've never got to, so no one is like quite clear what that would look like in Arizona. But if they don't pass a budget by June 30th, there's a government freeze. But again, going back to what I talked about to bring it full circle, they have their campaign squeeze. So I don't feel like we'll deal with that this year because they want to get out talking to their constituents. So not the most clear answer, but final answer, May 15th.
Hi. I have a question about some of the lobbying activities and political action committees that affect the legislation that affects our schools. One thing I saw, there's this group called Love Your School, and they advocate for vouchers and ESA vouchers. And a lot of people would argue that's in not competition, but it's not in the public school's best interest. And there aren't, as far as I know, is there a political action committee that rallies parents in the district for support of the legislation that actually is impactful for our schools? Do you know of, I mean, I know there's SOS there, but that's all of Arizona. Is there anything in Scottsdale other than the specific pack for overrides? Or, for instance, you're telling people to give them, your email address, which is amazing, and that you're willing to do that. But how, for as SPC, we're a nonprofit, 501c3, not a 501c4. We can advocate for certain things, but within limits. Same with the nonprofits throughout the district, the PTOs. There's always a lot of discussion amongst the PTOs what they're allowed to do. And that because it's cyclical and because it's a very short-term institutional memory, new PTOs get on board, and whatever they were advocating, they tend to disagree pretty much every year. It's always a debate. Can you shed any light on what can be done from parents in the district to organize, to get the word out on some of these bills that will actually benefit their kids, whether it's against or for?
So I'm not the whole political action, the PAC stuff. I am not an expert in that. But I've done a little bit of research on this, and I don't feel like there's something that you're looking for. There's a variety of C4s out there, but this really unique parent lens, I don't know of anything. I mean, there's a concept that's out there, Purple for Parents, but I don't know if that PAC is something that aligns with your goals and interest, or has a PAC, right? They're an organization, but I don't know if they have the PAC arm. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do a little research outside of this. I'm not an expert in the campaign space, but on the advocacy side, I'm just trying to think what are good ways, because there's like 200 education bills, so it's really hard for you all in your day-to-day to know what to track, what's important. I'll think about that. I feel like there's got to be some sort of mailing list that exists through some of these, maybe like School Boards Association, or I don't know. I'm happy to continue. I track a lot of this stuff, so I'm happy to send it in my tracking lists to you to circulate to this group. I'm more than happy to do any of that. But at the end of the day, it's important to know when to engage, right? Because timing is also really important. You all don't know when you're not living it like I am. I'm down there Monday through Thursday. So let me think about that answer, because I don't want to give you the wrong information, but I really want to be helpful, because I'm glad to hear that there is interest to engage, and they want to hear from you way more than they want to hear from me. So this is perfect. So let me think about that, and then I can get back in touch with you.
Any other questions? How bad do you think the cuts will be and for the budget? And you think education will be saved, or?
So I have optimism for education. New money? No, nothing there. So areas like that 300 million one time that we received really for inflationary measures, that's what keeps me up at night, because those types of things are substantial. And that would be new money, because again, it was just one-time funding. So I think that if anyone is going to stay at the most stable, I feel optimistic that it will be education. Where they're really looking at making cuts is transportation. They allocated a lot of money last year for transportation projects, which is great, right? I love driving on smooth roads, but that is sometimes easy, low-hanging fruit, because if they haven't started the project, if they haven't started digging up the roads, that's an easy thing to sweep. So I feel a little more at peace with education being in a better place, but some of these substantial line items that were generous one time last year, we're not going to see again, and that's where we will feel it. But this is totally out of our control, because we have a really gloomy budget outlook. So while we might not get cuts, this new money, which is something that we've really thrived in the last decade, education has received, some would say not enough money, but if you really look at the trajectory, we have gotten more money over time. So I think people just in general have gotten used to a little bit more each year, and essentially that's not going to be the case for the next several years, and we're going to feel it for sure. We will feel it. And then, there's the themes, and I know you guys had some success in your bond and overrides, but some of your neighbor districts really got injured by some of the rhetoric that their bonds and overrides weren't continued. And those are vital for some of these schools. I know, again, I'm in the East Valley. Mesa's override passed, but our bond didn't. And it's right. I take it personal because it's going to impact my students and that they had all these great plans for these buildings. So people just. There we go.
For clarification, I think what you were asking is what would those cuts look like for SUSD? What do you think, Dr. Mansell?
So the 300 million, I mean, what do you feel like that's going to look like?
So for us, we've already planned for the loss of the results-based funding. There's some carryover funds that are helping mitigate the impact of that, so it's kind of a step down. The other impact is the loss of ESSER funding because that ends September 30th. So we are, at least at this point, not recommending a reduction in force at scale at all. So I think Mesa had 380 or some odd individuals who were RIF'd recently. We believe that through natural attrition, we can surplus some of the individuals that were paid for out of ESSER dollars and find classroom opportunities for them or other openings. There may be one or two here or there that have to be addressed, but mostly we're going to be able to address that through attrition. And we budget in a way to hopefully avoid any dramatic reductions. But on the flip side, it means that we don't have resources for significant pay increases. So when you think about what the inflationary impact is on our employees, we're not able to provide as much as we would like. We do have some things that are in the works. Something that the governing board approved at its last meeting was $1,000 per person on an FTE basis as a one-time payment because we had those one-time monies this year, so that's one thing. We're still going through the bargaining process for other compensation adjustments. And then there's the increase in health insurance costs, which is why we're looking at how do we find a way to get quality health insurance at a more affordable price for our employees. At the end of the day, I'll go back to what we know makes a difference, and that is if we grow our enrollment or stem the tide of losses, that generates additional revenue. And if we get the additional revenue, we can put that back in our people, and so that's our goal.
So I have a question. So I have seen people enroll their children in private schools or in charter schools, and then the money goes to those schools, and then those kids don't pass a test, and they end up at my school, Mountainside. Okay? Do we get any of that money that went to that school?
So yes, in part. So Arizona uses average daily membership, and so if a student is enrolled from the first day of school through the 100th day, then you get full funding. If they're enrolled for less than all of that time, you get partial funding. And so it is a weighted formula based on how many days, average daily membership, and then are they a high school student or do they have any of the other weights that impact the funding. So unlike other states where you wouldn't get it, we get partial payment, potentially depending on when they make the transition.
So our results-based funding is paying for a reading aid specialist, and we're at a school where the PTO can then pay for it next year. But I just wonder, like that, it seems like something that's required under special ed also. So if, say, we weren't able to pay for it, what would then happen? Would other teachers be pulled in? How would we meet that requirement?
So this question came up at the last governing board meeting, and one of the things we're pulling together to share with the governing board is the number of reading specialists, math specialists, and other ancillary support that are provided across the district. Some of those individuals are funded by Title I dollars. Some are funded by the DSEG dollars that the district receives. Some are funded by, or have been in the past, by results-based funding. Others are funded by PTOs and APTs. And so there are a lot of supplemental supports that are provided, funded by various pots. And so looking at how much support is provided versus how much is needed when it comes to special education, that'll be driven by IEP requirements. And then there's the question about what are the other supports that we need. When you think about multi-tiered systems of support, core instruction is the focus. And so we want to be making sure that we're providing the best first instruction we can in the classroom. Tier 2 in multi-tiered systems of support is still support provided in the classroom and not pull-out. Oftentimes, the specialists have been pull-out to address smaller groups of students. So making sure that we're providing that customized pull-out support where it's really needed is another part of making sure that our system is working efficiently across all levels. Does that make sense?
Okay, this will be the last question though, because everyone needs to get home.
Heard that PTOs and outside agencies are not going to be able to fund these kind of positions going forward.
So,
Well, there's multifaceted, but so that.
So here's the situation is that in governing board policy and in the accompanying regulation, the wording is that the PTOs can provide funding to support classified positions, support positions, and while it says that certified positions generally should not be funded, there are conditions under which they can be funded. And there's some confusion about the extent to which positions that PTOs have paid for were classified versus certified and whether or not they got proper funding. We're working to clarify that, but it's not just a blanket no, they can't do it. It's about meeting the expectations within the governing board policy and regulations and addressing the equity question, because that's been the concern. So if you're in a community that can generate, $250,000, you have the ability to support a lot of positions. And if you're in another community that can't, we as a district need to make sure that we're balancing that so that wherever you go to school in Scottsdale, the students are getting the support they need. And so that's the conversation. I think sometimes it gets, it's easier for some people just to say, no, we're not going to do that. That's not really how we're approaching it. We're trying to be sure that we're consistent in following the policy and regulation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's just that Title I is when they receive the funding, they're able to fund those positions, and then so it kind of does create inequality.
And that's an analysis that we're doing to make sure that it's consistent and that the level of support based on the level of need is equitable across our schools. And can I clarify the question about homeschool kids in athletics? Just because I don't like to not have the answer, and I definitely don't like to be wrong, but I was wrong. And so here's the right answer. Homeschool students are eligible to participate in athletics in their school in which they reside. So if you live in the Arcadia boundaries, you can try out for a sport at Arcadia High School. That doesn't guarantee you get a spot, but you can try out. However, you must have an affidavit of being homeschooled by the state superintendent in order to be able to be eligible to try out for a sport. That's different than if someone's receiving an ESA. Some schools have said if a student's receiving an ESA, they can try out for their athletic programs, but there's a price tag associated with it, and it can vary, $2,000 or whatever the district decides. Scottsdale has not decided to allow ESA students to be considered for participation, but homeschool kids, if they meet the affidavit requirement, are eligible to try out for their resident high school. And thank you for being here. Thank you, Alexis, for all you do to support and advocate for public ed.
Okay, I have a few executive board announcements and then rep announcements. Oh, my computer is magically changing for me. That's awesome. Okay, so we'll start first with our budget update. Email came out again. The Financial Audit Committee has met once. We met last Thursday. We got through, so we have one full fiscal year and then two portions of fiscal years. We got through one of the first portions. I think we'll probably have a report at the next meeting, but if not, at the April meeting. And thank you to everyone on the committee. I really appreciate all of them giving their time. Okay, upcoming events. Right here on February 28th at 9:30 in the morning, we're going to have our third quarter PTO roundtable. The topics are school gardens and fundraising. We're going to hear from a parent who has been involved in school gardens K through 12 and has an amazing green thumb, someone who is a composting expert, and then fundraising is going to be from two perspectives, like DIY and then also partnering with a company to help you. Is there anything else either of you want me to add? No one's listening. Okay. Um, our March SPC meeting will also be right here. It's a morning meeting next month on March 20th. The topic will be parent volunteering. So this is going to be from the how do you do everything that you need to do to be able to help out at a school. You know, there's a lot of websites and maybe fingerprints and things like that. So all of your questions for how to get yourself into the classroom or helping out at school will be answered at our March meeting. And then that same day in the evening, we're going to have a special event, and it's going to be on teen driver safety. And so this event is 2 retired Phoenix police detectives. They give actually a much longer version through Scottsdale Community College, and they're going to use what they've learned in their careers investigating accidents to give you advice on how to keep you, yourselves, and your teen drivers safe. Okay, any rep announcements?
Can you hear me? I just wanted to say that Cocoa Pod Middle School just a couple weeks ago started a Jewish student union from one of our amazing teachers. She had been hearing just from different students about things that were being said and them being uncomfortable. So they had their first meeting, and it was really to hear what the students wanted to talk about, what the students wanted their agenda to be for the rest of the year. And I know that, I mean, my son was extremely excited. They got a great turnout, and I just really think in these times it's great for them to have that as support.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Board member here that has something exciting to say. Oh, I'm a board member. Yeah, you are.
Well, Desert Canyon Elementary School just earned their A+, and so we're all very excited to be an A+ School of Excellence.
Okay, the last thing that we'll say is to remind you all, we are a 501c3. We have operating costs like liability insurance, which lets us reserve this space for events like this and the general meetings like this and the teen driver safety one that's coming up. We rely on donations for all of our operating costs. So if you or anyone you know or any of your friends feel like supporting us, we have a web page. We have QR codes over there. And the PTO roundtables, which are also information packed. I did. Yeah. It's okay. Yes. Okay, does anyone have any questions about that? All right, thank you so much. We'll see you on the 28th and then again in March.